The barrel of a sawed-off shotgun pressed hard enough against Maya Reeves's forehead to leave a ring in her skin. She could feel the metal trembling, not from her own fear, but from the gunman's shaking hands. Around her, the Hartwell Emergency Clinic had gone silent in the way only a room full of people trying not to breathe can go silent. Patients frozen mid-motion, nurses pressed flat against walls. The monitors still beeping, indifferent to all of it. The man holding the gun was sweating through his jacket. He'd picked what he thought was the easiest target in the room. The small, tired-looking nurse with the oversized scrubs and the clipboard still in her hand. He had no idea what he'd just pointed a gun at. If this story already has you holding your breath, follow along until the very end. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Maya Reeves had been working the overnight shift at Hartwell Emergency Clinic in Denton Falls for going on 3 years. She was 31. She clocked in at 11, clocked out at 7, ate whatever was left in the break room, and rarely spoke more than necessary. Her coworkers described her the same way every time someone asked, quiet, competent, a little hard to read. The kind of nurse who never panicked during a bad trauma call, never raised her voice during a code, never seemed rattled by the kind of things that rattled everyone else. They had theories about why. Some figured she'd just been in emergency medicine long enough that nothing surprised her anymore. One of the older charge nurses, Dorothea Page, told the new hires that Maya had seen enough rough nights to grow scar tissue where the anxiety used to be. Mate. Nobody pushed further than that. Maya didn't invite questions about herself, and she wasn't rude about it. She was just sealed off in a way that felt deliberate. What none of them knew was that before Denton Falls, before Hartwell, before the overnight shift, and the break room coffee, and the oversized scrubs she wore because she'd lost 15 pounds after getting out and hadn't bothered buying new ones, Maya Reeves had spent 6 years as a combat medic attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Mali. She had treated men with pieces of shrapnel lodged inside their chests while rounds were still incoming. She had performed surgical interventions in FOB aid stations with no power, no clean water, and a flashlight duct taped to a rifle propped against the wall. She had been recommended for a commendation twice and refused the ceremony both times because the men who'd survived those nights deserved the attention more than she did. She had come home quieter than she'd left, which was saying something. The job at Hartwell had been her sister's idea. Just get back into medicine. It'll help. You need something familiar. And it had helped, mostly. Emergency nursing wasn't the same as combat medicine, but the pace was close enough to keep her mind occupied, and occupied was what she needed. She'd settled into the rhythm of it, the triage rotations, the overnight pace, the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who thought they knew you. She had never corrected their assumptions. It wasn't dishonesty exactly. It was just that explaining herself had never felt worth the energy it cost. Then the night of October 14th happened, and everything she'd quietly left behind walked back through the front doors. It started the way most bad nights at Hartwell started, understaffed and already behind. The waiting room was running about 12 patients deep when Maya came on at 11. There'd been a 4-car pileup on Route 9 earlier in the evening, and 2 of the trauma bays were still occupied with the aftermath. Dr. Vance Okafor, the attending on overnight, had been awake since 6 that morning and was running on coffee and irritation. The charge nurse, a compact, sharp-spoken man named Reuben Stahl, had been trying to discharge a chest pain patient for 40 minutes because the family couldn't decide whether to accept the discharge instructions. Maya had taken the board, assessed the waiting room, triaged a kid with a broken wrist, started a line on an elderly woman with dehydration, and was in the middle of a handoff with the day shift nurse when she heard the front doors bang open. Not the automatic slide of the entrance. A bang. Hard enough to rattle the glass in the frame. She looked up. 2 men. The first one was large, thick through the shoulders, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up despite being indoors, moving fast toward the reception desk. The second was smaller, jumpy, already sweeping the waiting room with his eyes like he was cataloging exits. The smaller one had his right hand tucked inside his jacket. Maya set down the chart she was holding. In the 3 seconds it took them to cross the waiting room, she had already processed the information and reached a conclusion that felt less like a thought and more like something her nervous system had decided independently. This is a robbery. There are two of them. The small one has a weapon. The large one probably does too. She stepped back, just a half step, and put a curtain rod between herself and the desk. The large man, she'd learned later his name was Darius Mack, vaulted the reception desk, shoved the front desk coordinator out of her chair, and pulled a sawed-off shotgun from under his jacket. He swept it across the waiting room in a wide arc and shouted something about everyone getting on the ground that Maya mostly processed as background noise because she was already watching the smaller one move toward the nurse's station. Nobody moves. Nobody gets hurt. Mac's voice was loud, but there was something uncertain inside it. We want the pharmacy cabinet. That's it. Open it up and we walk out. Reuben Stahl, to his credit, didn't move. He stood at the nurse's station with his hands flat on the counter and looked at Mac with the particular exhausted patience of a man who had dealt with too much that day to be properly frightened. Sir, I need you to... I'm not asking twice. That was when Mac spotted Maya. She was standing in the corridor that branched off toward the pharmacy, still holding the chart, not on the ground like everyone else. He crossed to her in 4 steps and put the barrel against her forehead. The waiting room went completely silent. You. His voice had dropped. Up close, she could see the sweat on his upper lip, the slight dilation in his eyes that suggested he'd taken something earlier. You work here. Take me to the narcotics cabinet. Maya looked at him. She felt the metal against her skin, cold and then quickly warm from her body heat, and she noticed her own pulse. Not fast, not slow, just steady, and thought, he's scared. Scared men were dangerous for a different reason than confident ones. Scared men made sudden decisions. Okay, she said quietly. I can take you there. Something in her voice made him blink. Whatever he'd expected, screaming, crying, begging, it wasn't that. He stepped back half an inch without seeming to realize he'd done it. Move then. She moved. The pharmacy corridor at Hartwell was an afterthought of the original building layout. A narrow hallway branching left off the main ER floor, with medication storage at the far end and a small supply room halfway down on the right. Maya walked slowly. Not slowly enough to make him suspicious, but slow enough to buy herself time to think. Behind her, she could hear the smaller man, Reuben would later identify him as a man named Cole Pritch, shouting at the nursing staff to stay on the ground, don't reach for phones, don't look up. She heard a woman crying softly. She heard someone's monitor alarm go off. Ignored. One problem at a time. The corridor was lit by overhead fluorescents, one of which had been flickering for 2 weeks because maintenance had it on a list somewhere. She passed the supply room. The supply cart was parked in the hallway, loaded with linens and 2 sets of trauma shears clipped to the side rack. She stopped at the medication cabinet, raised her key card, and tapped it against the reader. The light flashed red. What's the holdup? Max said behind her. Second factor authentication. She was looking at the screen, not at him. It takes a minute. He made a sound that was either impatience or suspicion. She couldn't tell without looking, and she wasn't going to look yet. There were several things she knew about Darius Mack at this point. He was right-handed. The shotgun was carried right, and when he'd vaulted the desk, he'd led with his right shoulder. He was large, but he was not trained. The way he held the weapon was all aggression and no technique, barrel high, elbow too far out. He was scared enough to be sweating indoors in October, and he had made the cardinal mistake of putting a shotgun against the forehead of a woman who knew exactly how much clearance she needed to redirect the barrel before he could react. She didn't make a move yet. She ran the numbers one more time, the way she'd been trained to, the way she still couldn't stop doing even when there was nothing at stake. The corridor is 9 feet wide. Supply cart is 2 feet to my left. Shears on the far hook, bottom rack. He's got maybe 30 inches of effective barrel behind me. She tapped the key card again. System's being slow, she said. It does this at night. Max stepped closer. That was the mistake. She'd never planned it to go quickly. Quick things went wrong. She'd planned it to go correctly, which was different. Her left hand came up, palm out, and made contact with the barrel at the moment she pivoted right on her back foot. Not a lunge, a rotation, controlled, the way they drilled it 700 times in close-quarters defense at Fort Benning. The muzzle swung wide of her head and discharged into the wall above the medication cabinet with a sound like a building collapsing. Plaster hit her shoulder, dust in her mouth. She had the barrel in both hands before the echo finished and drove her elbow up into the underside of Mac's jaw. His head snapped back. His grip loosened, not gone, but loose enough. And she torqued the stock hard left, leveraging against his thumb, and the shotgun came free. He was bigger than her by 80 pounds. It didn't matter. She was already stepping around behind him, arm across his throat from behind, her own body weight used as the mechanism, not strength. Don't muscle it. Use geometry. He went to one knee in about 4 seconds, hands coming up to grab at her forearm, which she'd expected, so she shifted her weight and he went the rest of the way down. He was breathing. She'd been careful about that. She picked up the shotgun, broke it open, dumped the shells on the floor, and set it behind the supply cart in one movement. 12 seconds, maybe 15. She heard Pritch from the main floor. Darius? Darius! And then the sound of running footsteps and a crash that she recognized as the crash of someone bumping the medication cart near the nurse's station. She came back out of the corridor at a controlled jog. Cole Pritch was a smaller problem physically, but a worse one tactically. He was standing in the center of the ER floor with the handgun, a .38 revolver she could see now, held out in front of him in both hands, and he was turning in circles because everyone on the ground was trying to make themselves flat against the floor, and he couldn't figure out which direction the threat was coming from. His face was drenched with sweat. His eyes were moving too fast. "Where is he? Where's Darius?" His voice cracked on the name. "Sir." Maya's voice came out even. She was aware this was the second time tonight she'd used that voice, and it still surprised her a little, the way the calm just came up from somewhere without her having to reach for it. She stopped 6 feet from him, hands visible, palms forward. "You need to put that down." Pritch spun toward her. She watched the gun track her and thought, "Don't move toward him yet. He's too wound up. Give it a second." "Where's Darius?" he said again. He's in the hallway. He's okay." This was approximately true. Mac was on the floor of the pharmacy corridor with a bruised windpipe and a cracked molar from the elbow strike, but he was breathing and he was not going anywhere. "What did you—" Pritch started backing up. "What did you do? Who are you?" The woman on the ground nearest to them, Maya recognized her as Lorraine Fitch, a 63-year-old with a kidney stone they'd been working up for the last 2 hours, was trying very hard not to make a sound. The elderly woman's IV line was still running, the bag swaying gently from where she'd lowered herself to the floor. Maya noted the line was still intact. "Good." "I'm a nurse," Maya said. "I work here. I'm not going to come any closer to you. I just need you to think about this." Pritch stopped moving. "You think about what you came here for," she said. "Narcotics." "That's what you said. But this is an ER, not a pharmacy distribution center. Whatever we have in that cabinet is going to be logged, tagged, and traced within the hour. There's no version of this where you walk out with something that helps you." She was watching his gun hand. It was shaking. "So you need to put it down." "You took Darius down," Pritch said. He said it like he still couldn't quite believe it. "You're a nurse." "I was something else first." She saw the shift in his face, confusion replacing some of the panic. And she used the second it bought her to take 2 steps left, closer to the desk, further from the patients on the floor. Pritch tracked her with the gun and took 2 steps back. His heel caught the raised threshold of the trauma bay door. What happened next was the kind of thing that happened in chaotic situations when frightened people were holding loaded weapons and trying to process too many things at once. Pritch went backward over the threshold, arms out for balance. His finger tightened on the trigger as a reflex, and the gun fired into the drop ceiling 3 feet above his own head. The ceiling tile exploded. He hit the floor hard on his shoulder, and the revolver skittered out under the trauma bay bed. The room went so quiet, Maya could hear the fluorescent flicker. Pritch was on the floor, holding his wrist, making a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a sob. He'd hit the floor wrong. Possibly a Colles fracture. She'd have to look at it. She crossed to him in 5 steps, kicked the revolver further under the bed, and knelt beside him. "Don't move your wrist," she said. "I'm going to look at it. He stared at her. "You're helping me?" "You shot your own ceiling." She was already palpating the joint, feeling for the displacement. Definite fracture, probably not compound. Lie still. Reuben Stahl appeared in the doorway of the trauma bay. He looked at Maya kneeling over the gunman. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the revolver under the bed. "Rubes," Maya said without looking up, "can you call 911 if nobody's done that yet, and then get me a splint tray and something for pain?" Reuben opened his mouth and then closed it again. "Please," she added. He went. Darius Mack was still on the floor of the pharmacy corridor when Reuben found him, which was where Maya had left him. He had gotten himself into a sitting position against the wall, was holding his jaw, and looked up at Reuben with the expression of a man who had recently had all of his assumptions about the world revised against his will. "The small nurse," Mac said, "in the big scrubs." Reuben crossed his arms. "What about her?" "What is she?" Reuben thought about it. "I genuinely have no idea," he said. The police arrived at 12 minutes after the initial 911 call, which had come in from a patient in the waiting room who'd managed to dial from the floor while keeping his phone against his stomach. 4 patrol units, then a 5th. Then a sergeant in a separate vehicle who stood in the doorway of the ER for a long moment, taking in the scene, before walking over to where Maya was finishing the splint on Pritch's wrist. The sergeant's name was Anita Kowalski. She was a 17-year veteran, and she'd been doing this long enough that very little surprised her. She still stopped short. "You're the nurse?" she said. "One of them," Maya said. "And you?" Kowalski looked at the ceiling, at the splint on the suspect's wrist. "You disarmed both of them. One of them helped with the other one." Maya clipped the last piece of the splint into place and stood up, aware for the first time that her shoulder was aching where the plaster had hit it. She rotated it, nothing structural. He tripped. Kowalski looked at Pritch, who was lying still and looking at the ceiling with the stunned vacancy of someone who'd had a very clarifying evening. "He tripped," the sergeant repeated, "into the trauma bay threshold. The gun went off into the ceiling. He fractured his wrist on the fall." She paused. "It's a Colles fracture, so he'll need to see orthopedics." Kowalski wrote something in her notepad. "And the other one?" "Pharmacy corridor. He's sitting up, he's breathing. He may have a mandibular contusion and his C-spine should probably be cleared, but he walked in on his own, so I don't think there's any cord involvement." The sergeant stopped writing and looked at Maya. "I've been doing this a long time," Kowalski said slowly. "I know the job takes a while," Maya said. "I mean, I've responded to a lot of scenes." Kowalski's voice was careful now, deliberate. "And I've never walked into a situation where the responding nurse gave me a medical update on both suspects." Maya didn't say anything. Kowalski studied her for another moment. Then she said, "I'm going to need a full statement from you tonight, and I'm going to need to know a little more about your background." "I figured," Maya said. She turned back to the trauma bay because Lorraine Fitch was still on the floor, and her IV bag was running low, and nobody had helped her up yet. The paperwork took until 4 in the morning. Maya sat at a table in the break room with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, and answered Sergeant Kowalski's questions in the flat, factual way she answered most questions about herself. Complete information, no elaboration, nothing offered that wasn't asked for. She was aware of how it came across. She'd spent years being aware of how she came across. She had worked as an Army combat medic for 6 years. Yes, she had received specialized close-quarters defense training as part of that assignment. No, she had not been in a situation like this before at Hartwell. Yes, she felt she had used the minimum necessary force. Yes, she understood there would be a review process. Kowalski had stopped taking notes about halfway through the interview and was just listening. When Maya finished, the sergeant sat back in her chair. "You mind if I ask why you didn't tell anyone about your background?" Nobody asked. "Your coworkers work with you every day." Maya looked at the coffee cup. "What would it change? I'm a good nurse. That's what the job requires." Kowalski was quiet for a moment. "You kept everyone in that room alive tonight, including both suspects. That's the job." "No," Kowalski said, and her voice had something in it that wasn't quite an argument, wasn't quite a compliment. "It really isn't." Maya picked up the coffee cup for the first time. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. By 5 in the morning, Hartwell Emergency Clinic had restabilized into something resembling a normal shift. The trauma bays were being cleaned. Lorraine Fitch had been helped up, given pain medication, and was resting comfortably, her kidney stone temporarily forgotten in the aftermath of the evening. The patrol officers had finished their sweep. The detective assigned to the case, a tall, lean man named Maurice Talbot, who'd arrived around 2 and spent an hour reviewing the security footage, had stopped by the break room before leaving and given Maya a card with a look she recognized. The look of someone reclassifying her in real time. She tucked the card into her scrub pocket and went back to the floor. The morning shift started coming in at 6:30. Word had already spread in the way things spread in small hospitals, where everyone knew everyone. A call here, a text there, someone's spouse listening to the scanner. The day shift nurses arrived in 1s and 2s, stopping in the doorway of the ER to look at the ceiling tile that hadn't been replaced yet, the numbered evidence markers still on the floor near the trauma bay. Dorothea Page arrived at 6:50 and stood in the hallway outside the break room for a long moment before coming in. Maya was at the counter, writing up a chart. She'd been on shift for almost 8 hours, and she was tired in the specific way she got tired at the end of long nights. Not sleepy exactly, more like scraped down to the structural elements. Dorothea sat down across from her. "So," the older woman said. "So," Maya said, "I heard you took down 2 armed men." "More or less." Dorothea was quiet. Then, "Why didn't you ever say anything about the army?" Maya kept writing. "I'm a nurse here. That's what's relevant." "Maya," Dorothea's voice was careful in a way that meant she was choosing her words. "We work together, every night." "I know." "And you never thought, what would you have done with it?" Maya set the pen down. Not sharply, just set it down. "Dorothea, what would you have done differently if you'd known?" The older woman opened her mouth and then didn't say anything. "I wasn't hiding it," Maya said. "I just wasn't advertising it. There's a difference." Dorothea looked at her for a long time. Finally, she said, "Is there anything you need from last night?" "Anything." Maya thought about it honestly. "The ceiling tile in Bay 3, she said. "It's been loose for a month. Maintenance needs to actually get to it." Dorothea blinked. "And the medication cabinet reader in the pharmacy corridor takes too long on the second factor. Someone should look at that." "That's..." Dorothea started to say, "That's not what I meant," but seemed to think better of it. "Okay, I'll put in the work orders." "Thank you," Maya said, and picked up her pen. She was almost at the door, coat on, bag on her shoulder, ready for the drive home, and whatever sleep she could manage before her next shift, when one of the patrol officers who'd been there the night before flagged her down in the parking lot. He was young, early 20s, the kind of young that made Maya feel the 6-year gap between them more than she usually would. He jogged to catch her, stopping a few feet back like he wasn't sure of his welcome. "Nurse Reeves?" She turned. "Detective Talbot asked me to let you know." He was a little out of breath. "There's a man inside who wants to speak with you. It's not related to the robbery review. He said to tell you..." The officer checked something on his phone. "He said to tell you he recognized the application from the footage. He wasn't specific about what that meant." Maya went still. "He's in conference room B," the officer said. "He's been there since about 4:30. The application, the way she'd redirected the barrel, the elbow strike, the choke. Those weren't civilian techniques. They weren't self-defense class techniques or things you picked up watching videos. They were specific, refined, and trained into the body at a particular address, during a particular period, for a particular purpose. Someone in that building had watched the security footage and recognized exactly where she'd learned them. She looked at the officer. He was waiting, uncertain, probably confused by whatever was on her face. She turned around and walked back inside. Conference room B was a beige box with a folding table, 4 chairs, and a whiteboard that still had someone's discharge planning notes on it from the previous week. Maya pushed the door open and stopped. The man sitting at the table was in his late 40s, maybe 50. He wore civilian clothes, gray slacks, a dark button-down, no tie. But he sat the way military men sat when they were trying not to look military and failing at it completely. Back straight without being stiff, hands flat on the table, eyes that had already mapped the room before she walked in and were now tracking her with the calm, evaluating patience of someone who'd spent a lot of years deciding quickly whether the person in front of him was a problem or a resource. He stood up when she entered, which was a particular kind of reflex. "Nurse Reeves." Not a question. "That's right." He extended his hand. "Colonel Garrett Foss, Army Medical Command." She shook it. His grip was even, nothing to prove. She took the chair across from him and waited. Foss sat back down and pulled a tablet toward him without opening it. "I want to be upfront with you about why I'm here and what I want, because I think that's going to go better than dancing around it." "I'd appreciate that," she said. "I was contacted by Detective Talbot's office at approximately 0100 this morning as a courtesy notification. Your service record is flagged for outreach in certain situations. Classified attachment, not widely circulated." He paused. "You know what I mean by that." She knew. There were maybe 40 names on a list somewhere in a database that she'd been told about once, at the end of her final deployment, by a colonel whose name she'd never heard before or since. "If certain circumstances arise, we'll know. You won't have to do anything." She'd filed it away in the category of things the Army said that may or may not mean anything at all. Apparently it meant something. "I watched the security footage," Foss said. 3 times. He opened the tablet and turned it toward her. The angle was from the corridor camera, black and white, the timestamp reading 11:42 p.m. She watched herself walk down the pharmacy hallway with Mac behind her, watched herself stop at the cabinet, watched the redirect, the elbow, the takedown. 12 seconds, give or take. She looked at it the way she'd look at something technical. She could see 2 small errors. The pivot had been a half beat slow, and her weight transfer at the end was a little high. Old habits getting sloppy from disuse. She'd noticed it in the moment, too, which was how she'd known it had been long enough. "Where did you train?" Foss asked. "Ranger Medical Course, then TCCC Advanced, then 6 months attached to the Asymmetric Warfare Group at Fort Meade." She said it flatly. "It's in my file." "It is. But files don't always explain what I'm looking at on this footage." He tapped the screen. "What I'm looking at here is someone who made multiple life or death decisions in about 4 minutes and got every single one of them right, including the one where she chose to keep both suspects alive. They were down. There wasn't a reason to do otherwise. There were plenty of frightened people in that room who wouldn't have seen it that way." Maya looked at the frozen image on the tablet. She didn't have a response to that because it wasn't wrong. She knew what fear did to judgment. She'd seen it, and she'd made a choice that a lot of people wouldn't have made. But it hadn't felt like a choice exactly. It had felt like what came next. "Why are you here, Colonel?" she said. "Specifically." Foss closed the tablet. He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was deciding how much to say, not whether to say it. "There's a program," he said finally, "Medical Readiness Integration. We're looking at building pipeline relationships with civilian trauma centers, specifically because combat experienced medical personnel in civilian settings are an underutilized resource in mass casualty preparedness." He paused. "You'd essentially be a consultant. It would require some reactivation paperwork, not a full return to active duty." She looked at him. "This is a recruitment meeting," she said. "It's an exploratory conversation. At 5 in the morning, after I worked a 12-hour shift and handled a robbery." Foss had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "The timing is what it is. I wanted to speak with you before you left the building." Maya leaned back in the chair. Her shoulder was still aching from the plaster, and she was tired in a way that had moved past her muscles and into somewhere deeper. And she was sitting in a beige conference room being asked to consider re-entering a world she'd spent 3 years very carefully putting distance between herself and. She was aware that her reaction to that was complicated enough that she wasn't going to sort it out in the next 2 minutes. "I appreciate you coming in," she said. "I'm going to need some time to think about it." "Of course." He slid a card across the table. Not a business card, a plain white card with a number handwritten on it. "That's a direct line. Whenever you're ready." She took the card. She didn't look at it. "One other thing," Foss said, standing. "The investigation into last night. I want you to know that Army Medical Command is aware of the situation and will provide whatever documentation is needed for the review." I wasn't worried about the review. He studied her. No, he said, in a tone that suggested this didn't entirely surprise him. I don't imagine you were. Oh, she drove home as the sun came up over the low skyline of Denton Falls, the city doing that particular thing it did in October, where the light came in sideways and made everything look briefly more significant than it was. She lived in a second-floor apartment in a converted building near the river, 15 minutes from Hartwell. She'd chosen it because the lease was month to month and the windows faced east, two criteria that had made complete sense at the time. She made eggs. She ate them standing at the counter. She put Foss's card on the kitchen table and looked at it while she ate, and thought about several things at once without reaching any conclusions, which was a habit she recognized and did not particularly like about herself. Then she went to sleep. She slept until 2 in the afternoon, which was unusual. Her body's default was 6 hours regardless of when she'd gone down, but the night had cost her something she hadn't fully accounted for, and she woke up groggy and stiff with her shoulder tight and a headache behind her right eye that she attributed to the plaster impact and the bad coffee in approximately equal measure. She had 11 missed calls. 7 of them were from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out to be a local news station. 3 were from coworkers, Ruben, twice, and then a number she identified after a moment as belonging to Dr. Okafor. One was from her sister, Vanessa, whose voicemail said only, "Maya, call me back, right now." I saw the news. She called Ruben first. He picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" "Home. I slept." She was sitting on the edge of her bed, rotating her shoulders slowly. It was better than this morning. Not good, but better. "What's the news situation?" "Someone pulled the security footage." His voice had the clipped quality of someone trying to give her information without editorializing. "Or a copy of it. It's on every local channel. There's a clip. It's maybe 30 seconds, the hallway camera, and it's been shared about 18,000 times since 6 a.m. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Maya." There was something in his voice she hadn't heard from him before, which was a particular kind of careful. "I need to ask you directly. Administration is being called for comment. Hartwell's PR person has been in the director's office since noon. Is there anything about last night that you didn't put in your statement? Anything that's going to be a problem?" She thought about Foss's card on the kitchen table. She thought about the classified flag on her service record. "No," she said. "Everything I did is on that footage. There's nothing else to put in a statement." The pause on his end lasted just a beat too long. "Ruben," she said, "is there something going on at the hospital?" He exhaled. "Dr. Harmon wants to meet with you this afternoon. She's the CMO. You may not have dealt with her directly before. She's asking about your credentials." Maya frowned. "My credentials are on file. I'm licensed. I've never had a complaint." "Right, but the thing is—" He stopped, started again. "The clip has been going around and people are asking questions about who you are, and apparently the nursing board has received— I don't know the details, I'm telling you what I heard in the hallway. Apparently someone filed an inquiry about whether your military training history was properly disclosed when you applied." She sat very still. "Who filed it?" she said. "I don't know." "Do you know when?" "This morning. Early." He hesitated. "Before 7. Before 7? She'd left the building at 6:40. The footage had started circulating around 6. Someone had watched the clip, identified her, and filed a professional inquiry within an hour of the footage going public. That was not spontaneous. That was prepared. "I'll be there at 4, she said, and hung up. She called Vanessa back while she was getting dressed. Her sister answered mid-first ring, which meant she'd been holding the phone. "Tell me you're okay first," Vanessa said. "I'm okay." "You're okay." A pause. The particular pause of someone who has been worried for hours and is now releasing it all at once. "I've been watching this clip on loop since 6 a.m., Maya. You told me last night was a slow shift." "It started slow." Vanessa stopped. "Do you know how you look on that footage? Do you know how you move? People in the comments are saying you're special forces." "I wasn't special forces." "That's your response? Not, 'Don't worry, Nessa.' Not, 'I'm fine.'" "You already asked if I was okay. I said yes." She found her jacket. The shoulder seam was torn where she'd caught the plaster. She put it on anyway. I have to go meet with hospital administration. Vanessa was quiet. Then, why? Someone filed an inquiry about my credentials. Another silence, different in quality. Who would do that? I don't know yet. She checked the time. I'll call you tonight. Maya. Vanessa's voice had dropped. Be careful. Not physically. You know what I mean? Maya did know what she meant. Vanessa had watched her come home from the army and spend 2 years being too careful, too flat, too managed. The wariness in her sister's voice was about the other kind of careful, the kind that kept you from telling people what you needed. I know, Maya said. I'll call you. She got to Hartwell at 3:40. The parking lot had a news van at the far end that she drove past without slowing down. Inside, the ER was running a normal afternoon pace. Full waiting room, 2 occupied trauma bays, the sounds and rhythms she'd been moving through for 3 years. She stopped by the nurse's station to check the board out of habit, and Reuben appeared at her elbow like he'd been waiting. She's in the second-floor conference room, he said under his breath, and the head of HR is with her. Okay. Dr. Okafor wanted to come, but they told him it wasn't necessary. She looked at Reuben. He was a compact, direct man who usually kept his feelings off his face as a professional discipline, and right now some of them were showing, not anger exactly, but something in that neighborhood. You don't have to do the worried thing, she said. I'm not doing a thing. I'm telling you facts. He stepped back. I'll be at the station if you need me. She took the stairs. Dr. Patricia Harmon was 62, thin, precise, and had the manner of someone who had spent decades making difficult administrative decisions and had learned to deliver them in the tone of someone explaining reasonable things to reasonable people. She sat at the head of the conference table. Beside her was a woman Maya didn't know, late 30s, HR badge, a legal pad in front of her. Nurse Reeves, Harmon gestured to a chair. Thank you for coming in. Maya sat down. I want to start by saying that everyone at this institution is grateful for what you did last night, genuinely grateful. Harmon's voice was level. The safety of every person in that building was your first priority, and that was evident. Thank you, Maya said. However, Harmon folded her hands. In the wake of what's become a very public incident, the administration has some questions we need to address directly, and I want to do that in a spirit of transparency. She glanced at the HR woman. When you applied for your position here 3 years ago, your employment history listed 2 years at Callaway Regional and 18 months at a traveling nurse agency. Your military service was listed on the application but without specific detail. My military service was listed, Maya confirmed. It was. Army Medical, 6 years, honorably discharged. What wasn't listed, Harmon paused in a way that was too precise to be accidental. What wasn't in your application was the specific nature of your training, the specialized combat instruction, the attachment to classified units. She stopped. We received a communication this morning suggesting that the omission of that information may have constituted misrepresentation. Maya looked at her steadily. The application didn't ask for specific training detail. It asked for military service history, which I provided. It asked for clinical certifications, which I provided, all of which are current and legitimate. That's correct. The application itself didn't specifically require that level of detail. Then what are we discussing? Harmon's expression didn't change, but something moved behind it. We're discussing whether the spirit of full disclosure was met, whether the institution should have had the opportunity to understand, more completely, the background of an employee who would be working in a clinical setting. With respect, Maya said carefully, I spent 6 years providing emergency medical care under combat conditions. That is a direct qualification for emergency nursing. I don't understand the argument that having more relevant experience constituted a misrepresentation. The HR woman wrote something on the legal pad. No one is disputing your qualifications, Harmon said. Then I'm trying to understand what's being disputed. A pause. Then Harmon said, there are liability questions. If an employee's military background creates a situation, and the institution wasn't fully informed. The situation last night was two armed men robbing the clinic. Maya's voice stayed even, but she felt something tighten in her chest. I prevented anyone from being shot. I gave medical care to both suspects. I provided a full statement to law enforcement. If the liability question is about what I did in those 4 minutes, I'm happy to go through it step by step. But if the question is about whether I should have pre-disclosed military training that nobody asked about, I'd like to have that conversation with an attorney present. Silence. The HR woman stopped writing. Harmon looked at her for a long moment. Then she said carefully, "That's a reasonable request. We can schedule a follow-up. I'd also like to know," Maya said, "who filed the inquiry with the nursing board, because the timing of it suggests someone was watching for an opportunity. And that's a different kind of concern." Harmon and the HR woman exchanged a look. "We're not in a position to share that information," Harmon said. "I thought we were doing this in a spirit of transparency." Another silence. Harmon's jaw tightened, barely perceptible. The inquiry came from outside the institution. From whom? "We're still determining that." Maya stood up. "Then I'll wait for the follow-up meeting. Thank you for your time." She walked out. She took the stairs back down, slower this time, and stood in the stairwell for a moment between floors with her hand on the railing, running the shape of what had just happened. Someone, outside the institution, organized enough to file within the first hour the footage circulated, had gone after her credentials before anyone had even finished their morning coffee. That meant the footage hadn't surprised them. Or if it had, they'd already had a response prepared for something like it. She thought about the pharmacy cabinet reader. She thought about the timing of the robbery. Two men who'd known exactly where the narcotics cabinet was and had come specifically for it, which was information that wasn't publicly accessible. She was still standing in the stairwell when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, but a 202 area code. Washington. She answered it. "Nurse Reeves." A woman's voice, brisk and careful. "My name is Special Agent Diana Lowry. I'm with the Army Criminal Investigation Division. I'm calling because we've been monitoring a situation that may intersect with what happened at your facility last night. I'd like to meet with you today if you're available." Maya looked at the stairwell wall. "CID," she said. "Not the review board." "Not the review board." "Can you tell me what situation?" "Not over the phone." A pause. "But I can tell you it's been active for about 5 months, and your clinic appeared on our radar about 3 weeks ago." Maya let that sit for a moment. 3 weeks ago. "I'm in the building now," she said. "I know, I'm in the parking lot." She looked up at the ceiling of the stairwell for a moment, then back at the door. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. She pushed through the stairwell door, and as she crossed the ER floor toward the exit, she passed Ruben at the nurse's station. He was watching her with an expression she didn't have time to interpret. She didn't stop. She pushed through the external door and out into the afternoon, and the news van was still at the far end of the lot, and a dark sedan was parked near the ambulance bay with a woman leaning against the passenger door. 40-something, short hair, jacket that said Federal by the cut of it. Lowry didn't extend her hand. She held up a badge instead. "CID, current." "Thank you for coming out," she said. "You said the clinic appeared on your radar 3 weeks ago," Maya said. "What does that mean?" Lowry looked at her for a moment, deciding the same way Foss had been deciding that morning. These were people who made decisions about information for a living, and it showed. "It means we've been tracking a pharmaceutical diversion network that operates through civilian medical facilities in 4 states, Lowry said. "Controlled substances, military grade. The network has a distribution point that we believe is connected to at least 2 clinics in this region." She paused. "Hartwell appeared in our financial mapping 3 weeks ago. Specifically," she stopped again. "Specifically what?" Maya said. Lowry looked at her steadily. "Specifically, the narcotics cabinet access logs from your clinic show a pattern of discrepancy that started about 4 months ago, small enough to miss on a single audit, large enough to flag over time." Maya was very still. The October afternoon was cold enough now that she could see her breath. Behind her, the hospital hummed its ordinary sounds. In front of her, Lowry waited with the patience of someone who understood how information landed. "The robbery last night," Maya said slowly. 2 men who knew exactly which cabinet to go to. who knew the layout of the corridor. Yes, Lowry said. You think someone inside the clinic sent them. Lowry didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it either. I think, she said carefully, that you stumbled into the middle of something last night that was never about narcotics at all. And I think whoever is behind it is very unhappy that it didn't go the way they planned. She held Maya's gaze. And I think the inquiry filed against your credentials this morning was their way of trying to make you a problem instead of a witness. The wind came off the river, and Maya felt it against the back of her neck. Somewhere in the parking lot, a door opened and closed. She thought about Harmon's face when she'd asked for an attorney, the careful way the administrator had said outside the institution, the way the HR woman had stopped writing. You said 4 states, Maya said. How big is this network? Lowry opened the rear door of the sedan and took out a manila folder. She held it out. Maya took it. She flipped it open. The first page was a financial mapping chart, clinic names, dollar amounts, dates, and she saw Hartwell's name near the bottom, circled in red, and beside it in red ink someone had written a name. She looked at the name. She had seen that name that morning. Not on the footage, not in a statement, on the nursing board inquiry, in the filed by field that Harmon had told her she couldn't share. Her thumb pressed flat against the paper. How long have you known? She said. Known or suspected? Either. Lowry was watching her carefully. Long enough that last night wasn't a coincidence. Maya looked up from the folder, the news van at the end of the parking lot, the sealed folder in her hands, the name in red ink. Something in the last 8 hours was rearranging itself into a shape she didn't fully have yet, but the edges of it were beginning to be visible, and what she could see was not small. The name on the folder was Terrence Wohl. Maya knew the name because it had been on the organizational chart in the HR packet she'd received during onboarding 3 years ago, in the category of people she'd probably never deal with directly. Terrence Wohl, Director of Pharmaceutical Operations, Hartwell Emergency Clinic, and its 2 affiliated outpatient sites. A back office position. The kind of title that meant you managed vendors and audits and supply chain logistics and almost never set foot on the clinical floor. She had met him exactly once, at a staff appreciation event in her first year, and her only memory of the interaction was that he'd shaken her hand without making eye contact and moved on immediately. She looked up at Lowry. He's been here the whole time. 4 years. Lowry took the folder back. We believe he's been running the diversion scheme for the last 18 months, possibly longer. Small quantities rotated across controlled substance categories to avoid triggering automated flags. He has access to the procurement system, the dispensing logs, and the audit schedule. She paused. He knew when audits were coming and adjusted inventory accordingly. For a while that was enough. But then it wasn't. The discrepancies got larger. 3 months ago, our financial forensics team flagged the pattern. We've been building a case since then. Lowry glanced at the news van, still parked at the lot's edge. Last night accelerated things. Maya turned that over. A robbery that targeted a specific cabinet in a specific corridor, in a clinic where the pharmaceutical director had inside access to everything. 2 men who'd known the layout well enough to go straight to the pharmacy hallway without hesitating. Mack and Pritch, she said. You think Wohl sent them. We think Wohl owed someone, and that someone sent them on his behalf. Lowry's voice was careful, stripped of the kind of certainty that wouldn't hold up in court. There's a supply disruption. A shipment that went sideways 2 months ago, approximately $60,000 worth of product that the network expected and didn't receive. Wohl's been under pressure to make up the difference. She paused again. We think last night was supposed to look like an opportunistic robbery that happened to clean out a narcotics cabinet, clean the debt. Nothing traceable back to him. Except I was there. Except you were there, Lowry said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite wry and wasn't quite exhausted but was somewhere between the two. Maya looked at the hospital entrance, the automatic doors sliding open and closed as staff moved in and out, afternoon shift changeover beginning. Normal. Completely normal to anyone watching from the outside. The credential inquiry, she said. He filed it to discredit me before the investigation gets to him. To create noise. An employee with a disputed background, a complicated military history that wasn't fully disclosed, It shifts the story. It raises questions. Lowry straightened away from the car door. We don't have enough to arrest him yet. The financial case needs another 10 days minimum. But last night changed his timeline too. He knows the robbery failed and he knows the footage is out. He's going to move. Move how? Cover his tracks. Delete logs. Move product. Contact whoever he's working with. She held Maya's gaze. We need access to the dispensing logs from the last 6 months. We need them before he can alter them, and we need them from a source that's clean. Someone inside the clinic with legitimate access and no prior connection to the investigation. Maya understood what was being asked before Lowry finished the sentence. You want me to pull the records, she said. I want you to continue doing your job. If, in the course of doing your job, you access the dispensing logs that you have legitimate clinical reason to access, and if those logs reflect what we believe they reflect, Lowry stopped. You'd be a witness, not an agent. It's legal. It's within your access level, and it protects the chain of evidence. But if he's watching the access logs, he'll see a nurse who's been in the news doing a records check, which any nurse who'd just been involved in a narcotics robbery might reasonably do. She paused. It's a risk. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. Maya was quiet for a moment. The afternoon wind came off the river again, and she could smell the cold in it, the specific cold that came in off the water in October and meant winter was making up its mind. If I say no, she said, we build the case the way we were building it, slower, and he has more time. She looked at the hospital, thought about Ruben's face when she'd walked past him, thought about the flickering ceiling tile in Bay 3 that was on a maintenance list somewhere, thought about Lorraine Fitch sitting on the floor with her IV bag, swaying. I'm working tonight at 11, she said. Same as always? Lowry nodded once. Maya handed back the folder and walked back into the building. She didn't go home. She drove to a diner 2 miles from Hartwell called Pirelli's that she'd been eating at since her first week in Denton Falls, largely because it was open 24 hours. The coffee was genuinely good, and nobody there had ever tried to make conversation with her. She took the corner booth, ordered coffee and a bowl of soup she barely touched, and spent 2 hours thinking. The thing about thinking clearly was that it required a specific kind of emotional flatlining, not suppression, which was different and worse, but a deliberate setting aside, like putting something down on a table so you could use both hands. She'd learned it in the army, where the alternative to thinking clearly was usually bad. She'd gotten good at it. She ran the shape of it again. Wohl had been running a diversion scheme. The scheme needed a clean exit for a debt, so he'd arranged a robbery of his own clinic. The robbery had failed because of her. The footage had gone public. He'd filed a credential inquiry to create a counter-narrative. Don't look at the pharmaceutical director. Look at the suspicious nurse with the secret military background. And now a CID agent was asking her to pull records that might unravel the whole thing, while Wohl was almost certainly doing the opposite on his end. The complication she kept returning to was this. She had no way to know how much of what Lowry had told her was accurate, how much was interpretation, and how much might be wrong in ways that would matter later. Investigations had momentum, and that momentum shaped the conclusions people reached. She'd seen it happen. She also had no way to know who else inside Hartwell might be involved. She was still sitting with that when her phone rang. Ruben. She answered it. You need to come back, he said. His voice was wrong, clipped in a different way than usual, not the deliberate clip of professional control, but the shorter, harder clip of someone managing something they weren't sure how to name. What happened? She said. Darius Mack just came in by ambulance. A pause. He's coding. She drove back in 11 minutes. The ER was already reorganized around the incoming trauma when she pushed through the doors. 2 nurses she recognized working the bay, Dr. Okafor at the head of the bed, the particular focused noise of a resuscitation in progress. She went straight to the sink, gowned up, and came in. Mac was on the table. He was gray. The monitor showed a rhythm she recognized immediately as ventricular tachycardia trending toward fibrillation, unstable, deteriorating, the kind of presentation that was either fixable in the next few minutes or not fixable at all. Okafor glanced up when she came in. He looked exhausted and steady at the same time, the way he always looked during a bad code. Good timing. Charge to 200. She reached the defibrillator. Charged. Clear. The shock went through. Maya watched the monitor. The rhythm stuttered, held sinus for about 4 seconds, then fractured back into the irregular pattern. Again, Okafor said. 220. The paramedic who'd brought him in was still in the bay, giving his report in the rapid shorthand of someone who'd been through this more than a few times. Found down in county lockup holding, approximately 40 minutes after he complained of chest pain to the floor officer. BP was 80 palp on arrival. We couldn't get a stable line. What was his status when he left here last night? Maya asked. She was watching the monitor and also pulling a second line kit because one wasn't going to be enough. Medically cleared, the paramedic said. Respiratory intact, neuro intact, no cardiac history on file. She glanced at the bruising on Mac's neck, her own work from the night before, the choke that had brought him down. She looked at it clinically. The bruise was significant, brought across the sternocleidomastoid. She looked at his airway. No stridor, no visible soft tissue swelling that would explain a sudden cardiac event. His neck looks clear, she said, not to anyone specifically. It is, Okafor said. That's not what we're treating. He looked at the monitor. Get me an echo. She moved. The portable echo took 3 minutes to get positioned and another 30 seconds to produce an image, and what it showed when it came up made Okafor go very still. She was looking at the screen over his shoulder and she saw it too. A small, bright collection of fluid in the pericardial space, compressing the right ventricle on every beat. Pericardial effusion, cardiac tamponade, building. That wasn't there when he left, Okafor said, mostly to himself. No, she said. Tamponade from blunt trauma could develop over hours. The mechanism was a slow accumulation of blood in the pericardial sac. If there was a small injury that went untreated, the fluid built up, gradually, compressing the heart until the ventricles couldn't fill properly and the cardiac output collapsed. It was survivable if you caught it. It was not survivable if you didn't. We need a pericardiocentesis, Okafor said. Now. He looked at her. You've done this under field conditions. It wasn't a question. She didn't know if Lowry had said something to someone or if Okafor had just watched the footage like everyone else and drawn conclusions, but she didn't have time to think about it. Subxiphoid approach, she said. I'll need a spinal needle, 18 gauge, long, pressure monitoring on the line. Walk me through it, Okafor said. He was already setting up, hands moving, and she understood. He'd done this procedure twice in his career under controlled conditions and never in a deteriorating trauma. He wanted her verbal support on the landmarks and the angle. Needle at 45 degrees from the xiphoid aimed at the left shoulder, she said, pulling gloves. You're going to feel 2 pops, the peritoneum and then the pericardium. When you're through, blood in the syringe under no pressure means you're in the right place. Blood that pulsates means you've hit the ventricle. Back off. Okafor nodded. He's going to fight the needle, she said. Hold his sternum. She held it. The procedure took 4 minutes. Okafor's hands were controlled, careful, and not quite steady at the very end, which was human and understandable, and the needle found the pericardial space on the first pass. 42 milliliters of dark, non-pulsatile blood came out, and the monitor, which Maya was watching over Okafor's shoulder, converted to sinus rhythm within 90 seconds of decompression. The room exhaled. Mac's color came back in increments, like a tide. Okafor stood back. He looked at the monitor, at the patient, at his own hands. Then he looked at Maya. Good call on the echo, he said. You ordered it, she said. She pulled the procedure tray for disposal, and her hands were steady, which she noted and filed away. The county sheriff's deputy who'd accompanied the ambulance was waiting outside the bay. He was a young officer. She'd placed him at mid-20s, maybe, and he had the specific expression of someone who'd spent the last hour being very worried about something they didn't have the authority to be worried about. He's stable, she told him. The deputy exhaled. Is he going to make it? Looks that way. She stripped her gloves. He needs observation tonight, but the acute threat is resolved. She paused. Can you tell me what happened at the facility? The deputy shifted. I'm not supposed to. I'm his treating nurse. I need a full history of any events that might be relevant to his cardiac presentation. He considered this. He was in general holding. The charge at lockup said he complained of chest pain about 40 minutes before we got there. The chest pain started a little after he had a visit. A visit, she said. His attorney. The deputy was looking at the wall over her shoulder now. Or someone claiming to be his attorney. The log shows a 30-minute visit, but when we tried to contact the number on file for the public defender's office this afternoon, they had no record of a visit scheduled. Maya looked at the deputy. Someone visited Mac in holding today, she said slowly, claiming to be his attorney, and a few hours later he's in cardiac arrest. The deputy said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Does your facility have footage of the visit? Sheriff's already pulling it. He glanced at the bay where Mac was still connected to the monitor, chest rising and falling steadily. What would cause that? The heart thing. If someone wanted to... He stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. She thought about it. 42 milliliters of blood in the pericardial space. Trauma pattern effusion, but Mac had been medically cleared before he was transported to county. If the original choke hadn't caused a cardiac contusion significant enough to produce that volume of effusion, and the post-incident assessment had been thorough enough that she believed it hadn't, then something else had. Something that had happened after he left Hartwell. Something you could introduce during a 30-minute visit in a room with no medical monitoring, if you had the right knowledge and the right access, and a very particular reason to make sure Darius Mack didn't get to have a formal conversation with law enforcement. She looked at the deputy. Call Detective Talbot, she said. Right now. Tell him it's connected to the Hartwell robbery case. The deputy was already reaching for his radio. She turned back to the bay, and as she pushed through the door, she pulled out her phone and typed a text to the number Lowry had given her in the parking lot. Mac was nearly killed in holding, someone with medical knowledge. You need to know tonight. She sent it and slid the phone back into her scrub pocket. The monitor beeped steadily. Mac's chest rose and fell. She checked his pressure. 94/60. Not good, but not critical, trending in the right direction. She adjusted his drip rate and looked at his face, which was slack and gray, and at rest in the particular way of someone who'd just been pulled back from a place they wouldn't have returned from. She'd disarmed him last night and put him on the floor. Tonight she'd kept him alive. She wasn't sure how she felt about that, or whether she had the bandwidth to figure it out right now, so she noted the ambiguity and kept moving. Damnashi. Ruben found her at the medication cart at 9:43, 40 minutes before her shift technically started, running through the previous night's dispensing log with the kind of systematic attention that would look, to anyone watching, like exactly what it was. A nurse who'd been involved in a narcotics robbery, double-checking the cabinet records for her own peace of mind. The logs were on the system. She had full access. She took her time with it. The discrepancies were not large. They were, in fact, small enough that she would have missed them if she hadn't known to look for a specific pattern. But once she'd seen the first one, a 10-milligram morphine entry logged as returned to stock at 3:18 a.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago, under a patient ID number that she cross-referenced against the admission log and found belonged to a patient who had been discharged at 11 the previous night. The rest of them became visible, not obvious, not sloppy, careful, patterned, distributed across 3 controlled substance categories to avoid triggering the automated flag thresholds. She looked at the authorization codes on each anomalous entry. The same 4-digit override code appeared in 17 of the 23 flagged entries over the last 6 months. Override codes were issued by the pharmaceutical director's office. She took screenshots with her personal phone, then emailed them to the address Lowry had given her, then went back to the system and documented her access in the nursing notes under post-incident medication audit, personal review, no patient care concerns identified. Clean, accurate, appropriate. She was closing the system when Ruben appeared at her elbow. "You're early," he said. "I was here anyway." She logged out. Mac's looking stable. Pressure's coming up. Ruben was quiet for a moment, then carefully. Detective Talbot was here about an hour ago. He asked for the pharmaceutical director. Maya looked at him. "Well, wasn't in the building," Ruben said. "They checked his office. His computer is still on. His coffee cup is still on his desk." He paused. "His car is still in the parking garage." She felt something drop through her chest. "He's in the building," she said. That's what Talbot thinks. Reuben's voice had gone very quiet. They're looking, but Hartwell is 140,000 square feet, and half of it is basement storage and maintenance tunnels. And her phone went off. Lowry, she picked up. I got your message and the screenshots, Lowry said. Her voice was clipped in a way it hadn't been in the parking lot. We're moving on a warrant, but it's going to be another hour minimum. Is Wohl in custody? No, Maya said. He's in the building, somewhere. A pause. Reeves. Lowry's voice changed register, just slightly. He knows you pulled those logs. The access is visible to him in real time if he's still on the system. Maya looked at the medication cart, at the computer she'd just logged out of, at the screen that had gone back to the system login page. Ordinary and blank. How long ago did he go off the grid, she said. About 40 minutes. She did the math without meaning to. 40 minutes ago, she'd been in the bay with Mac, away from the nurse's station, away from the main floor. Reuben, she said carefully, not into the phone, just into the air of the medication room. Where's the maintenance tunnel access from this floor? He looked at her. He was smart enough to understand the question meant something before he understood what it meant. Supply corridor, he said, behind the linen room. She said into the phone, Lowry, I need units in the building now, not in 5 minutes. There was a sound from the corridor behind her, not a large sound, the particular soft percussion of a door that had been held, not allowed to swing. She turned around. The linen room door was 11 feet away and it was 3 inches open when it had been closed a moment ago. She didn't move toward the door. That was the first decision, made in about half a second, and it was the right one. Moving toward an unknown in a confined corridor with no visibility past a 3-inch gap was how people got hurt. She stepped back instead, putting the medication cart between herself and the linen room, and said quietly into the phone, Units in the building, Lowry, now. Then she lowered the phone without ending the call and looked at Reuben. He had already understood. She could see it in the way he'd gone still. Not frozen, just stopped, the way people stopped when they were trying to think faster than their body wanted to move. She held up 2 fingers. Stay back. He stayed. The door didn't open further. That meant something. A man running, a man panicked and trying to get out through a maintenance tunnel, would have pushed through already. The fact that it had opened 3 inches and stopped meant he was standing behind it listening, which meant he was making a decision too. She knew what she would do in his position. She would think about the exits. The maintenance tunnels in a building this size connected to the loading bay and the basement parking structure. If he got into the parking garage, units outside wouldn't be looking in the right place. She'd worked enough night shifts to know the building's sounds from the inside, which meant Wohl, who had been here 4 years and never needed to leave quickly, probably hadn't thought through this far. Probably. She moved along the medication cart and put her back to the wall beside the linen room door, 6 inches from the frame. Not in front of it. To the side, where the swing of the door would buy her a second. Then she said, clearly, at a volume that would carry through 3 inches of gap without her needing to raise her voice. Mr. Wohl, there are units coming into the building right now. If you go into the tunnel, they'll close the loading bay before you get to it. She paused. This is the better option. Nothing for 4 seconds. Then the door swung open. Terrence Wohl was not what she'd been picturing, which she recognized as a failure of imagination on her part. She'd been building a version of him in her head since she'd seen his name in red ink on Lowry's folder. Organized, calculating. The kind of man who moved numbers around on a spreadsheet and made clinical decisions about which people were inconvenient. The man standing in the linen room doorway was wearing a gray suit jacket that he'd sweat through at the collar, and he was holding a laptop bag against his chest the way people held things when they were about to drop them. He was 53. He looked older than that right now. He looked mostly like a man who'd spent the last several hours realizing the ceiling was coming down. He looked at Maya. Something moved across his face that she couldn't entirely categorize. Not guilt, not defiance, something more complicated and more tired than either. The logs, he said. His voice was hoarse. Yes, she said. You pulled them tonight. I had access. It's my clinic. He looked at Reuben, then back at her. He was doing arithmetic in his head. She could see it, the rapid calculation of someone trying to figure out how much had already moved beyond his reach. I need you to understand, he started. Mr. Wohl. She kept her voice even. I'm not law enforcement. I can't offer you anything, and I can't make anything worse. The decision about what happens next is already out of both of our hands. She looked at the laptop bag. But if you have documentation in there that helps us understand what happened to Darius Mack and Holding today, this goes better for you than if you don't. He flinched at Mack's name. She registered that. He's alive, she said, in case you didn't know. Wohl closed his eyes, just for a moment. When he opened them, something in his posture had collapsed. Not dramatically, just a settling, like a building after a small tremor. He sat down on the linen room floor. She did not have a response prepared for that. She looked at Reuben, who looked back at her with the expression of a man who had had a very long 2 days. Wohl set the laptop bag on the floor beside him. He didn't open it. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the tile. From somewhere below them, she heard the sound of the building's main entrance opening, then boots in the stairwell. Detective Talbot arrived on the floor 3 minutes later with 2 uniformed officers and Lowry a step behind him. Lowry saw Maya first, standing in the corridor outside the linen room, and something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, more like the expression of someone who'd been calculating odds and found them better than expected. Wohl was still on the floor. Talbot cuffed him without theatrics, which Maya appreciated, and one of the officers took the laptop bag as evidence. Wohl didn't resist any of it. He was answering questions before he was fully on his feet, not spilling, not confessing in the dramatic sense, but providing information in the steady, exhausted manner of someone who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had simply stopped. Maya heard pieces of it, enough pieces to start assembling the rest. The diversion scheme had begun 22 months ago, not with Wohl's initiative, with pressure from a distribution network that had already identified Hartwell as a soft target and approached him through an intermediary he'd initially thought was a procurement consultant. He'd been in debt, specific and significant debt, the kind that came from bad decisions stacked on top of each other over years. The scheme had seemed, at the beginning, like a temporary arrangement. She understood how that worked. She'd seen enough to know that temporary arrangements never were. The shipment that had gone missing 2 months ago, $60,000 of product that the network claimed Wohl owed them, had never been his to lose. It had been intercepted by another member of the network, a fact he'd discovered 6 weeks ago and been unable to prove. He'd been paying the debt with clinic inventory ever since because he'd had no other lever. Mack and Pritch had not been his idea. They'd been the network's ultimatum, a cleanup operation dressed as a robbery, designed to balance the books and close the Hartwell exposure in one event. He'd provided the clinic's layout and the cabinet access code because he hadn't seen another way out. When the robbery failed, when the footage went public, when he'd understood that the investigation would now find everything, he'd filed the nursing board inquiry because someone above him had told him to. Create a distraction, give them somewhere else to look. He said he hadn't known about the visit to Mack and Holding. Talbot didn't confirm whether he believed this, and neither did Maya, but she noted the way Wohl's voice changed when he said it. A different kind of hoarseness, the kind that came from something other than fear. Lowry pulled Maya aside while Talbot continued with Wohl. The network contact, Lowry said, keeping her voice down. He's given us a name. We've been looking for this person for 14 months. Who is it? Someone in the county medical supply chain, not a clinician. Logistics, procurement, the people who move product between facilities. She paused. We'll have him by morning. Maya looked at Wohl, still talking to Talbot in the corridor, his suit jacket hanging wrong on his shoulders. He tried to have Max silenced, she said. He says he didn't authorize it. Someone did. Yes. Lowry's voice was flat. Someone did. And that person is still out there tonight, which is why I need you to go do your shift and let us handle the rest of this. Maya looked at her. I mean that as a practical instruction, not a dismissal, Lowry said. You've given us what we needed. The logs, the access data, the physical apprehension of a suspect who walked out of a maintenance corridor instead of into it. She paused. Go be a nurse. That's what protects you now. It wasn't bad advice. Maya recognized it as such and went. Bob. The shift ran until 7. Ordinary by Hartwell standards, 2 chest pains, 1 pediatric fever, a laceration, a broken wrist from a fall, and Lorraine Fitch back in Bay 2 because the kidney stone that had been overshadowed by the robbery had decided to announce itself again more forcefully. Maya put in a line, administered the pain protocol, and sat with her for a few minutes while the medication took hold. "You're the one from the news," Lorraine said. She said it without accusation, just recognition. "Apparently," Maya said, "you were very calm." Lorraine's voice was softened by the pain medication starting to work, a slight drift in her consonants. "When he had the gun, you were the only person in the room who looked calm." "I wasn't calm," Maya said. "I was managing." "What's the difference?" She thought about it. "Calm means you're not afraid. Managing means you're afraid and you work around it." Lorraine considered this. "Which is better?" "Managing," Maya said. "Calm people make mistakes because they stop accounting for what can go wrong." The older woman made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You're an unusual person, Nurse Reeves." "I've been told." She finished the shift. She wrote her notes. She handed off to the day team. The story broke fully the following morning, and it broke large. Not because of anything Maya did or said. She didn't talk to the news van, didn't return the 7 calls from the number she'd identified as a local station, didn't answer the 2 emails that had somehow found their way to her Hartwell account. It broke because Wohl was arraigned at 9 a.m. in front of a courthouse that had enough media present to suggest someone in law enforcement had made a call, and because the arraignment filing was public record, and the filing was detailed in the way that meant Lowry's team had been ready for this moment. The charges were substantial: pharmaceutical diversion, conspiracy to commit theft, obstruction of justice, and, the one that would carry the most weight in a courtroom, conspiracy to commit assault, connected to the visit to Mac's holding cell. The network contact Lowry had mentioned was arrested at his home at 6 a.m., simultaneously with Wohl's arrest, and that arrest added federal trafficking charges to the picture. Maya read about it on her phone at Pirelli's, eating eggs she was actually eating this time, and sat with the information in the same deliberate way she sat with most things. Wohl had spent 4 years in the building she worked in. He had been present at every staff meeting she'd attended, every policy update, every annual review. He'd shaken her hand once without making eye contact and moved on. She tried to find in herself some feeling about that, some retrospective sense of having been near something dangerous without knowing it, and found mostly tiredness and a low-grade irritation that the scrambled eggs were slightly overcooked again. She was on her second coffee when Talbot called. "Good morning," he said. "Detective, I wanted to update you directly before you heard it from someone else." His voice had a quality she recognized from the night of the robbery. Careful, but differently careful than it had been then. Less uncertain. "The nursing board inquiry has been formally withdrawn. Wohl's attorney submitted the withdrawal this morning as part of the initial cooperation agreement." "I figured," she said. "The hospital administration has been briefed on the full investigation timeline. Dr. Harmon has been asked to provide a written statement regarding the meeting she held with you yesterday afternoon." Maya was quiet for a moment, thinking about Harmon's careful voice, the spirit of full disclosure, the HR woman's notepad. "She was acting on bad information," Maya said. "Wohl fed them a concern and they ran with it." "Possibly," Talbot said, in a tone that meant the investigation would determine that. "Is there anything else you need from me?" "Your formal statement, updated to include last night's events. You can do it in writing and submit it through the detective's office. I'll have my assistant send you the form." A pause. "Reeves, for what it's worth, the logs you pulled last night, the way you documented the access, the chain of evidence, that's going to matter in court." "Good," she said. "Where did you learn to think about evidence chains?" She looked at the window. The morning was gray, and the river was the color of old steel from here. "Same place I learned most things," she said. He didn't push it. She slept until noon, showered, changed, drove back to Hartwell because she had a meeting request from Dr. Harmon that had come in at 8 a.m., and she'd decided somewhere between sleep and waking that she was going to attend it. Harmon's office was on the 3rd floor, a corner room that looked out over the parking garage and, beyond it, the river. Harmon was at her desk when Maya came in, and she stood up in the way she'd stood up at the conference table 2 days ago, the same careful, precise manner. But something was different in it now, less managed. She looked like someone who'd had a very uncomfortable night. "Nurse Reeves," she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Thank you for coming." Maya sat. Harmon sat. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at Maya with an expression that was working toward directness and getting there slowly. "I owe you an apology," she said. Maya waited. "The meeting yesterday was—" Harmon stopped. "The inquiry from Mr. Wool's office was presented to us through a third-party HR channel in a way that obscured its origin. We acted on it without sufficient verification, and the result was that we questioned your professional integrity at a moment when you had just prevented serious harm to every person in this building." She paused. "That was wrong, institutionally and personally." "I understand why it looked the way it looked," Maya said. I know it doesn't excuse it." Maya kept her voice even. "But I'm not looking for more than the acknowledgement. The inquiry is withdrawn. The record is clear." She met Harmon's eyes. "What I'd like to understand is what the institution is going to do about the fact that someone in a director-level position was running a diversion scheme through this clinic for almost 2 years. Harmon's jaw tightened slightly. "The board is convening an emergency session this week to review pharmaceutical oversight protocols and the audit systems," Maya said. "The automated flags were calibrated at thresholds high enough that small discrepancies didn't trigger them. That's a gap. It needs to be closed, and someone who actually works clinical nights should be in the room when you're deciding what the new thresholds look like." Harmon looked at her. "Not me specifically," Maya said. "I'm not volunteering for a committee. I'm saying the people who catch anomalies are usually the ones running medications at 3 a.m., not the ones reviewing quarterly reports." A silence. Then Harmon said, "That's a fair point. Thank you." Another silence, this one different. Harmon was studying her with an expression that had moved past discomfort into something more evaluative. "Colonel Foss called this office this morning," she said. Maya had expected this. Not the timing, but the fact of it. "I was informed that Army Medical Command has an interest in your continued role here, potentially in an expanded consulting capacity." Harmon's voice was careful. "I want you to know that Hartwell would have no objection to whatever arrangement serves you professionally." "I haven't made a decision about that," Maya said. "Of course." Harmon unfolded her hands. "Is there anything the institution can do for you right now, formally?" Maya thought about it. "The medication cabinet reader in the pharmacy corridor," she said, "and the ceiling tile in Bay 3. Harmon blinked. "Both have been on maintenance lists for weeks," Maya said. "I'd like them done." Harmon looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called someone and said flatly, "Today. Not the list. Today." The ceiling tile was replaced by 4 p.m. Maya was in Bay 3 when the maintenance worker finished it, not because she was watching for it, but because she was doing a supply check and it happened while she was in there. The worker tested the panel, confirmed it was seated, and left without ceremony. She stood in the empty bay for a moment. The new tile was slightly whiter than the surrounding ones. You could tell it was new. In a few months it would match. In a year, nobody would know which one it had been. She went back to the floor. Reuben found her at the end of the afternoon, in the break room, coffee in hand, going through the updated dispensing protocol that the Pharmacy Oversight Board had issued as an immediate interim measure. He sat across from her and for a moment didn't say anything, which was unusual enough that she looked up. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He picked up the coffee pot. "I just wanted to say, for the record, that working with you is extremely strange, and I think I'm going to need to recalibrate whatever assumptions I had about the people I work with." She looked at him. "That's a compliment," he said, "in case it wasn't clear." "It wasn't, initially." He poured his coffee, set the pot down. "You're staying, right? I heard the Army wants you for something." "I haven't decided." "Can I say something about that?" "You're going to either way." He acknowledged this with a slight tilt of his head. "You're good here. Not just at the job. I mean, obviously you're extremely good at the job. That part is not in question. But you're good here. People trust you. Even before anyone knew the rest of it, they trusted you. He paused. That matters. It's not nothing. She didn't answer. She thought about what she'd said to Lorraine Fitch, the difference between calm and managing. She thought about 6 years of managing and then 3 years of managing differently, and the way the night of October 14th had been both of those things at once. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. He stood up. Bay 1 needs a secondary line. Pritch is back. She looked up. Pritch? Released from county medical this morning. He's back with the wrist fracture and possible complications from the original reduction. Nobody at county apparently followed up on the positioning. He said this with the professional disapproval of someone who took fracture reductions personally. He asked for you specifically. She sat with that for a moment. He asked for me. By name, Reuben paused in the doorway. I told him I'd ask. She thought about the revolver skittering under the trauma bay bed, about Pritch on the floor, holding his wrist, staring at the ceiling with the stunned look of someone who'd just had several assumptions revised about how the evening was going to go. You're helping me? She stood up and took her coffee. Pritch was in Bay 1 in a hospital gown, his right arm in a soft cast from the county facility that was already visibly edematous at the thumb joint. Bad positioning, the cast was too tight in the wrong place. He looked up when she came in, and his face did something complicated. He was 26. She hadn't noticed that before. He looked younger in a hospital gown than he had with a gun. I heard you were in the building, he said. I work here. She set her coffee down and pulled gloves. Let me see the wrist. He held it out. She examined the swelling, palpated along the cast edge, checked capillary refill on his fingers. 2 of them were sluggish. The cast needs to be reapplied, she said. The positioning is compressing the radial nerve. That's what's causing the numbness. Yeah. He was watching her face. They said there might be something wrong. There is something wrong. It's fixable. She made a note for the orthopedic on call. It's going to be uncomfortable when they remove it and reset it. Okay? He was quiet for a moment, then, I heard about the guy. In county, that somebody tried to... He stopped. He's stable, she said. Mac is stable. Pritch looked at his lap. He's not... he and I don't know each other that well. We were supposed to go in, get the stuff, get out. Nobody said anything about... He stopped again. She wasn't law enforcement. She wasn't going to tell him what to say or not say. She finished her note and said, You should tell your attorney everything you just told me, in detail. He looked up. It helps to have cooperated early, she said. That's not legal advice. It's just generally true. He nodded. Then quietly, Why did you fix my wrist? The first time. She pulled off her gloves. Because it needed to be fixed, even though The wrist didn't do anything. She picked up her coffee. The wrist just needed to be fixed. He was quiet for a long time. She was almost at the bay door when he said, I'm sorry. For the gun. For all of it. She didn't turn around. Tell your attorney, she said, and went back to the floor. The formal investigation results came in over the following 10 days in pieces, the way these things always arrived. Press releases, court filings, interagency communications that Lowry forwarded to Maya's personal email with the relevant sections flagged. Wohl's cooperation had opened 3 concurrent investigations across 2 states. The network contact, a man named Silas Varga, who had been running product through 4 county medical supply chains for nearly 3 years, was denied bail on federal trafficking charges. 2 additional clinic employees at Hartwell's affiliated outpatient sites were identified as knowing participants in the diversion scheme, neither of them clinical staff. Darius Mack, once he was stable enough for a formal interview, gave a recorded statement to Detective Talbot and Lowry's team that corroborated Wohl's account and added several details about the network's operation that Lowry described in a terse email as significant. The man who had visited Mack in County Holding, claiming to be his attorney, was identified from the facility's security footage as a low-level courier connected to Varga's organization. He was apprehended 3 days later at a bus station in a neighboring state. Cole Pritch's attorney filed a cooperation agreement on day 4. The orthopedic repair on his wrist was successful. On day 7, the Denton Falls Courier ran a front-page piece on the investigation. The headline was straightforward and the article was thorough, and somewhere in the middle of the 5th paragraph, it described Maya as a former Army combat medic who had been working at Hartwell for 3 years without her colleagues being aware of her military background. The article was accurate. The reporter had talked to Talbot and to Lowry and apparently to Dorothea Page, who was quoted as saying, "She was always the nurse you wanted in a crisis. We just didn't know how far back that went." Maya read it at Pirelli's, ate her eggs, which were still slightly overcooked, drank her coffee, left a $10 tip because the server had been working a double, and it showed. On day 8, Colonel Foss called again. She let it go to voicemail. Listened to the message that evening, sitting by the east-facing windows as the sun went down over the river. He'd said what she expected him to say. The program was still available. The offer was still open. When she was ready. She sat with Foss's message and with the quiet and with the specific feeling she'd been having for the past week that was not quite resolution and not quite exhaustion, but something that sat between the two. A stillness, not a settled one, more like the stillness of something that hasn't decided yet what it's going to do next. She was still sitting there when her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. "Nurse Reeves." The voice was a woman's, measured, careful. Not Lowry. Someone else. "My name is Dr. Sylvia Tran. I'm the Deputy Surgeon General for Army Medical Command. Colonel Foss reports to me." A pause. "I'd like to have a conversation with you at your convenience. Not about the consultation program." Another pause. "About something larger." Maya looked at the river. The last of the light was going off it. "How much larger?" she said. "Significantly," said Dr. Tran. The silence that followed was the kind that meant the next thing said would matter. Significantly was not a word Dr. Sylvia Tran used carelessly. Maya understood this within the first 30 seconds of the call, the way you understood things about certain people quickly, not from what they said, but from the spaces between what they said, the precise economy of someone who had spent decades choosing words the way a surgeon chose instruments. "I'm not recruiting you," Tran said. "I want to be clear about that up front because Foss probably gave you the impression that's what this is." He mentioned a program. "The program is real and it's fine. It's also not what I'm calling about." A pause. Not hesitation, more like the pause of someone organizing information for transfer. "I've been following the Hartwell situation since Foss's initial contact. Not the robbery specifically, the investigation underneath it, the diversion network, the scope of it." Another pause. "We have a gap, Nurse Reeves, in how Army Medical Command interfaces with civilian trauma infrastructure, specifically regarding pharmaceutical oversight and supply chain integrity. We've known about the gap for 2 years. What we haven't had is the right person to help us think about closing it." Maya was looking at the river, which had gone flat and dark in the last of the light. "I'm a floor nurse," she said. "You're a combat medic with 6 years of operational experience who has spent 3 years embedded in a civilian emergency setting, who identified a diversion scheme through pattern recognition during a 12-hour overnight shift, who preserved a chain of evidence under pressure, and who apprehended a suspect without causing injury to anyone, including the suspect." Tran's voice was dry in the way of someone who found the understatement mildly amusing. "You're many things. Just a floor nurse is not among them." Maya didn't answer. "I'm not asking for a decision tonight," Tran said. "I'm asking if you'll come to Washington and have a conversation. That's the entirety of the ask." She looked at Foss's card on the kitchen table. She'd moved it from the table to the counter 3 days ago and then moved it back. She wasn't sure what that said about where she was on the question. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I need." Tran paused once more. "One other thing. The formal recognition ceremony. Army Medical Command is coordinating with your hospital administration. It's been scheduled for the 14th. That's 2 weeks out." "What ceremony?" "Colonel Foss didn't mention it." "No." "Then I'll let the paperwork be the introduction." A brief, measured beat. "Good night, Nurse Reeves." The call ended. Maya sat by the window for a long time, watching the dark come all the way in off the river, and thought about the particular weight of being seen by the right people after a long period of being seen by no one at all, and whether that weight was a relief or its own kind of burden, and concluded, honestly, that it was probably both. The paperwork arrived 2 days later, forwarded from Hartwell's HR department to her email with a cover note from the administrative coordinator that said only, "Please review and sign where indicated." The document was 4 pages of formal Army language that resolved, at its core, to a commendation for actions taken on October 14th, with additional recognition for her role in the pharmaceutical investigation. Her service record, which she hadn't accessed in 3 years, would be updated to include both. There was also a separate letter, on Army Medical Command letterhead, that formally acknowledged the classified nature of her prior service attachments and stated in language that had clearly been reviewed by multiple attorneys that the omission of classified service details from a civilian employment application constituted standard and appropriate protocol and that no inference of misrepresentation should or would be drawn therefrom. She read this last letter twice. It was, in its way, an apology from an institution that didn't use the word apology. She understood that. She'd spent 6 years inside that institution, and she knew how its vocabulary worked. She signed what needed signing and sent it back. The day of the ceremony was overcast, the way October days in Denton Falls frequently were. A low gray sky that wasn't threatening rain but wasn't promising anything better. The trees on the clinic's small landscaped entrance already stripped down to their structural lines. Maya arrived 20 minutes early because she was constitutionally incapable of arriving at anything late, and she sat in her car for those 20 minutes because she was also not entirely sure she wanted to walk inside yet. She was wearing her own clothes, not scrubs, dark slacks, a plain jacket, her good boots. She'd made an effort and then immediately second-guessed the effort, and then decided the second-guessing was counterproductive, which was the cycle she'd been through approximately 4 times since Tuesday. Vanessa had driven up from the city the night before and was currently sitting in the passenger seat, which Maya had not asked for and had also not asked her to leave. "You could just go in," Vanessa said. "I know. People are probably in there waiting. I know. You've literally—" Vanessa stopped herself. Tried again. "You've been in worse rooms." "Different rooms," Maya said. "Not worse." Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is this weird for you, the being recognized part?" Maya thought about how to answer that honestly. "It's not that it's weird, it's that it requires something I'm not always good at." "What?" "Letting people see it." She looked at the entrance. "I spent a lot of years training to be useful in ways that didn't require anyone to know who I was. That's a specific skill set. This is different." Vanessa was quiet again, a longer quiet this time. Then she said, "Maya, the ceiling tile, the medication reader, the broken wrist, the man on the floor of the pharmacy corridor who's alive right now." A pause. "They all required someone to know who you were eventually." Maya looked at her sister. Vanessa shrugged, a small shrug that was both dismissive and absolutely not dismissive. "I'm just saying, you've been letting people see it the whole time. You just didn't notice." Maya got out of the car. The atrium of Hartwell Emergency Clinic had been cleared of its usual configuration. The chairs rearranged, a small podium set up near the main desk, a cluster of people that was larger than she'd expected. She saw Reuben immediately, standing near the back with his arms crossed and his face set in the professionally neutral expression he used when he was feeling things he didn't intend to advertise. Dorothea Page was next to him, and beside her, 3 nurses from the overnight rotation who waved when Maya walked in with the unguarded enthusiasm of people who'd decided formality wasn't worth it. Dr. Okafor was near the front. He nodded when she caught his eye, a specific nod that carried more freight than it looked like. Dr. Harmon was at the podium. She looked composed and slightly uncomfortable, which Maya had come to recognize as her baseline when she was doing something that required acknowledging she'd been wrong. Colonel Foss was standing to the side in dress uniform, which was the first time Maya had seen him in uniform, and the effect was different from the civilian clothes he'd been wearing in Conference Room B, more formal, more freighted with the shorthand that military insignia carried to anyone who could read it. Beside him stood a woman in her 50s who Maya identified from the photo in the Army Medical Command press release she'd been sent, as Dr. Sylvia Tran. Tran was compact, upright, with the kind of still attentiveness that suggested she was processing everything in the room simultaneously and had been for some time. And standing slightly apart from the official cluster, near the windows, were two men Maya hadn't expected. The first was Detective Talbot, in a suit that looked like it had been pressed specifically for this occasion. The second was Sergeant Kowalski, in uniform, who met Maya's eyes when she walked in and gave her a single nod that carried in it the recognition of one person who'd seen the facts clearly for another. Maya crossed the room. Harmon spoke first. The remarks were institutional, careful, appropriately worded, acknowledging the clinic's debt to Maya's actions without dwelling on the preceding administrative failure long enough to make it an indictment of the administration, which was probably the correct call in this particular room. Maya listened without feeling much about it. The words were right. The impulse behind them was genuine enough. She didn't need more than that. Foss spoke second, and he was better at it than she'd expected. Brief, specific, no filler. He cited the classified citation by its reference number without disclosing its content, which was the appropriate way to handle it, and he cited the October 14th actions in plain language that didn't inflate them or minimize them. 2 suspects neutralized, clinic personnel protected, pharmaceutical evidence preserved, chain of custody maintained under operational pressure. He said operational pressure and meant it exactly the way it sounded, which she appreciated. Then Tran stepped forward. She didn't go to the podium. She stood in front of it, which was a small thing and also not a small thing. A deliberate choice to not put furniture between herself and the room. "I want to say something that isn't in the official remarks," Tran said. Her voice carried without effort. What happened in this building on October 14th was not remarkable because Nurse Reeves had specialized training. Training is a tool. What was remarkable was what she did with it, and more specifically, what she chose not to do with it. She paused. She chose not to use it as a definition. She came here and she was a nurse because that was what the work required, and she did that work for 3 years without asking anyone to see her differently. And then, when the situation changed, she was exactly what was needed without having to become anything she wasn't already. Tran looked at Maya directly. "That is, in my experience, one of the rarest things there is." The room was quiet in the particular way rooms went quiet when something true had just been said in them. Maya looked back at Tran and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would improve on the silence. The metal was smaller than she remembered them being. She'd been given 2 during her service and had put both in a box that was currently on a shelf in her closet, not displayed, not hidden, just stored, objects that represented things that had happened, which was all they were. This one was different in category. A civilian commendation from Army Medical Command, which was its own distinct thing. But it had the same basic property of being a small piece of metal that stood in for a larger and more complicated set of facts. Foss pinned it while Tran stood beside him, and someone took a photograph, and Maya stood for the photograph without expression because expressions in photographs felt constructed to her in a way she'd never been able to get past. Then it was over, in the way formal moments ended. A small release of collective breath, conversations starting up at the edges of the room, someone from catering appearing with a table of food that nobody was quite hungry enough for yet. Reuben materialized at her elbow within approximately 90 seconds. "How are you doing?" he said. "Fine." "You don't look—" "Reuben." "You look fine," he said, course-correcting with the speed of someone who'd learned. "Very fine." She almost smiled. It was close. Dorothea found her next, and the older nurse took both of Maya's hands in hers in a gesture that was so uncharacteristically warm that Maya blinked. 3 years, Dorothea said. "I should have asked you more questions." "I wouldn't have answered them," Maya said. "That's true, but I should have asked anyway." Dorothea squeezed her hands once and let go. "You're a good nurse. You were always a good nurse. I want that on the record separate from everything else." "I know," Maya said. "Thank you, Dorothea." Okafor came by next and said simply, "The pericardiocentesis. I've been going back over the landmarks in my head." "Your angle was good," she said. "The needle path was clean. I second-guessed the depth. You corrected before it mattered. That's the same as getting it right." He looked at her with the expression of a man deciding whether to push back on that logic, then apparently deciding it wasn't worth it. If you ever want to cross-train in procedures, I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. He'd learned, like Reuben had learned, that I'll think about it from Maya was not a deflection. It meant exactly what it said. Tran found her near the windows, 20 minutes into the post-ceremony conversation, in a way that suggested the finding had been planned to look casual and wasn't. Washington, Tran said. No preamble. I've been thinking about it, Maya said. And? Maya looked out the window. The parking lot, the river beyond the tree line, the gray October sky doing nothing in particular. She'd been looking at this view for 3 years from the inside of a building she'd chosen because it was familiar enough to feel manageable and unfamiliar enough to feel safe. She'd been trying, she understood now, to stay inside the perimeter of what she knew without having to acknowledge she was doing it. The night of October 14th had made that impossible, not because of what had happened, but because of what she'd discovered in the happening of it. That the perimeter she'd drawn around herself was smaller than what she actually was, and that the gap between those two things had been costing her something she hadn't given herself permission to name. She was 31 years old. She had treated men with shrapnel in their chests. She had found a pharmaceutical diversion scheme by reading medication logs at 3 a.m. She had kept 2 armed men alive when the easier choice had been not to. She was also a woman who ate slightly overcooked eggs at a corner diner because nobody there expected anything from her, and who had moved a business card from one side of her kitchen to the other 3 times in 10 days because making a decision felt like something she had to be ready for before she could do it. Both of those things were true. Neither of them canceled the other out. Not the consultation program, she said to Tran. What you were describing on the phone. The gap in supply chain oversight. The interface between Army medical and civilian infrastructure. That's correct? Who else is involved in building that? At the moment? Tran considered. 2 people from the Inspector General's office, 1 from the Defense Health Agency, and now, potentially, you. She paused. We're not building a committee, we're building a methodology. That requires someone who has worked both sides and understands where the seams are. I'd need to stay clinically active, Maya said. I'm not going into a fully administrative role. That's not what I'm asking for. And I'd need access to the actual floor-level data, not filtered reports, the raw logs. Agreed. And I'd need... She stopped. Tran waited. I need time to think through what I need, Maya said, which was honest enough that it surprised her a little. Tran almost smiled. That's the most useful thing you've said. The sentencing for Terrence Wohl came 3 weeks later. Maya was not in the courtroom. She had not been asked to testify, her evidence having been submitted in written form, and she had not requested to attend. She learned the outcome from Talbot, who texted her a summary at 4 p.m. on a Thursday. Wohl, 9 years federal, no parole option. Varga, 14 years federal trafficking, 2 outpatient employees, 3 and 4 years respectively. Mack, 7 years, 2 counts robbery plus conspiracy. Pritch, 18 months, cooperation credit, served concurrent. She read the text between patients, standing at the nurse's station with a chart in her other hand. She stood with it for a moment, then set the phone down and went back to work. Mack's number she sat with longest. 7 years was a significant sentence for a man who had been, in the final accounting, a tool used by people who had more options than he'd had. She didn't have a position on whether that was right or wrong exactly. It was what it was, and the courts had weighed what they'd weighed, and she was aware that her own view of Darius Mack was complicated by the fact that she'd spent 45 seconds keeping him from dying in a pharmacy corridor and then watched him code in an ER bay 2 days later. You couldn't do those things and maintain a simple opinion of a person. She went home, ate dinner, and called Vanessa. It's over, she said when her sister picked up. I know, I saw it on the news. Vanessa paused. How are you? Maya thought about it. I think I'm not bad. That's the most enthusiastic self-assessment I've heard from you in 3 years. It's accurate. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, then carefully. Have you decided about Washington? I'm going to meet with Tran next week. A pause. It's not a decision yet. It's a conversation. But it might become one. It might. She could hear Vanessa working through something on her end of the call, the particular silence of her sister deciding whether to say the thing she was actually thinking. "Say it," Maya said. "I think it would be good for you," Vanessa said. "The work part. I think you know what to do with work. It's the other parts I—" She stopped. "Never mind." "Say it, Nessa." "I just want you to also let people know you, not in a debrief, not in an event." A pause. "You, the person who eats eggs every morning and tips too much and moves business cards around her kitchen table." Maya looked at the kitchen table. The card had been gone for a week. She'd finally put it in the drawer where she kept things she needed to be able to find. "I'm working on it," she said, and she meant it. Shot. On the last night of October, Maya worked the overnight. 11 to 7, same as always. The waiting room had 8 patients when she came on. A moderate night, nothing extraordinary pending. She took the board, assessed the room, started a line on a man with a hypertensive crisis, and spent the first 2 hours of her shift doing the specific, grinding, important work of keeping people from falling through the cracks of their own emergencies. At 2 in the morning, a teenage girl came in with her mother, a 16-year-old named Becca, thin and pale and clearly in more pain than she was admitting to, holding her abdomen the careful way of someone who had learned not to make a fuss. The mother was frightened in the controlled way of someone who'd been told not to overreact and was now wondering if she'd overcorrected. Maya took them back, did the assessment, recognized an appendiceal presentation that was closer to the edge than it looked, and moved with the particular speed she used when speed was warranted and calm was essential simultaneously. She had the surgical consult called and the labs running within 12 minutes of the girl's arrival. Becca looked at her from the bed with the specific kind of attention that teenagers gave adults who hadn't talked down to them. "Is it bad?" she said. "It's going to need surgery," Maya said. "Tonight, but you got here in time, which means the surgery is going to be straightforward." She adjusted the IV line. "You did the right thing coming in." "My mom thought I was being dramatic." "Your mom brought you here," Maya said. "That's also the right thing." The girl was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're the one from the news, the nurse." "I work here," Maya said. "You took down 2 guys with a gun. One of them helped," Maya said. "He tripped." Becca looked at her. "You're really calm." "I'm managing," Maya said, and the girl looked confused, and Maya found herself almost explaining it. The difference, the distinction, the specific discipline of working around the fear instead of past it. And then stopped, because the surgical resident was coming in and there were things that needed doing, and some conversations were for other rooms, other times, other people who were not currently presenting with a ruptured appendix. She stepped back and let the resident take over and went to brief the mother in the family waiting area. And when she came back to the main floor, Ruben was at the station with 2 coffees and a look that said he'd made a judgment call about what was needed. She took the coffee. "Quiet night," he said. "Moderate," she said. "Same difference at 3 a.m. She drank the coffee, which was better than the coffee from the break room, and stood at the nurse's station looking out at the ER, the occupied bays, the monitor lights, the specific texture of the building at this hour when it was doing its most honest work, when there were no administrators or cameras or ceremonies, just the continuous, unforgiving work of keeping people alive. And she felt something that she would not have called contentment exactly, because she was more honest than that, but was close to it. A rightness, a sense of being in the correct place, doing the correct thing, with a clearer understanding than she'd had a month ago of what else she was, and what else she was capable of, and what she might, in the next chapter of her life, build with those things. She had been dismissed as just a nurse, which was a dismissal of both parts of that phrase, the just and the nurse. She had never been just anything, and nursing was not a lesser thing to have been doing while waiting for the world to recognize her. It was the work. It had always been the work. The recognition didn't make the work more. The work had been the whole thing the entire time. She understood that now in a way she hadn't before October 14th. Or maybe she'd understood it, but hadn't believed it all the way down. And the difference between understanding something and believing it all the way down was, in her experience, the difference between knowing where the needle goes and actually making the incision. At 3:17 a.m., her phone buzzed on the station desk. Tran's office, confirming the Washington meeting for Thursday. She looked at the confirmation for a moment. Then she typed back, "Confirmed. See you Thursday." She set the phone down and went back to the floor. But there is a kind of strength that announces itself with noise, that needs the room to know it's there, that requires credit to feel real. And then there is the other kind, the kind that works in silence for years, that treats 12-hour overnight shifts and cold coffee and budget maintenance requests as its natural habitat, that does not need a ceremony to know its own worth and does not need an enemy to reveal itself. That kind of strength is quieter and less cinematic and considerably more dangerous because it doesn't depend on being seen to remain intact. Maya Reeves had known what she was long before anyone else in the building did. The question she'd been working through, in the break room and the diner and the kitchen with the business card and the east-facing windows and the months and years before any of it, was not whether she was enough. She'd always been enough. The question was what she was going to do about it. She'd answered it the only way she knew how, by showing up, doing the work, and trusting that the rest would find her when it was supposed to. It had. She had stopped requiring the world to make her worth something. She'd understood, through the specific education of difficult years and harder nights, that worth was not something granted. It was something practiced, built in small increments, in every decision made correctly when nobody was watching, in every patient helped fully, in every moment